The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the dusty plains with streaks of gold and fire. From the wooden porch of her small homestead, Clara squinted against the glare, clutching the worn shawl around her shoulders. The wind carried a hint of autumn, sharp and dry, rustling the corn that clung stubbornly to life in the cracked soil. Her heart raced with a worry she could no longer keep at bay. Her daughter, little Lila, had nowhere to turn. The farm could not sustain them much longer, and Clara's pleas for help had fallen on ears too weary or too stubborn to listen. She had tried every neighbor, every friend in the nearby town, even the preacher, but nothing had changed. The gnawing fear in her chest whispered louder than the morning wind. Lila needed a home, and soon. The sound of hooves against the hard-packed dirt made Clara start. She had grown used to the rangers passing through and the occasional traveler, but this was different. Steady, deliberate, almost purposeful. Her gaze shifted to the trail, narrowing on the figure approaching. He rode with a quiet authority, a man not accustomed to wasting words or gestures. The Apache's dark hair fell around his shoulders, framing eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. He slowed as he neared, tipping the brim of his worn hat, a gesture both polite and commanding. Clara felt an unfamiliar tremor, a mix of caution and curiosity, as the stranger's gaze met hers. "I heard you need a place for your girl," he said, voice low but steady, carrying the kind of calm that could settle storms. There was no boast in his tone, no pride, only a quiet offer that made Clara both relieved and wary. She studied him carefully. The Apache had lived along these lands long enough to know them, to read the subtle dangers that hid beneath the hills and the plains. Yet he carried himself with restraint, as if he understood more than he let on, as if he carried a burden he was not ready to share. Clara swallowed hard, unsure if hope was a luxury she could afford. "Yes," she said finally, voice almost breaking. "I don't know what to do. The winter's coming, and I can't." Her words faltered, caught in the knot of fear that had been tightening for months. Lila's needs were simple, but survival had made them monumental. Food, warmth, safety, things that once were taken for granted, now demanded every ounce of her strength to provide. And yet, even as she stood there, seeing the Apache, something stirred within her. A quiet, impossible spark. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance she hadn't dared to hope for. The Apache dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the soft dirt of the yard. He did not rush, did not appear eager to impress, but every movement seemed measured, purposeful. Clara noticed the way he scanned the horizon, the cautious tilt of his head as though weighing unseen threats. Yet when he looked back at her, his expression softened. There was a gentleness in his eyes that contrasted with the rugged exterior, a depth that made her chest tighten. "I can take her," he said finally, the words simple, almost understated. "She'll be safe. I'll see to it." There was a pause, a weight in the air as if he had spoken something far heavier than a promise. Clara's mind raced. The neighbors would talk. People in town might raise eyebrows, question her judgment. And yet, the desperation pressing on her heart left no room for caution. Lila needed a home, and this man, this stranger, offered one. I don't know how to thank you," Clara murmured, glancing toward the small cabin behind her, where Lila was likely still curled under blankets, uncertain of the world outside her little window. "She's just a child," and her words stopped as the Apache's gaze softened again, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "She's more than just a child," he said, voice low, carrying the kind of conviction that surprised her. "And she deserves more than just a roof and food. She deserves someone who cares, someone who can see her for who she is, not just what she needs." His words lingered in the crisp morning air, gentle but firm, stirring something within Clara that she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope, fragile and untested. Clara studied him. She did not know his story, did not know why he had wandered into her life at such a critical moment. But there was a quiet certainty in the way he held himself, a patient strength that seemed to promise protection. And then, in a way that startled her, she realized something else. There was a dream behind those eyes. Not a dream of conquest or vengeance, as she had feared might dwell in a stranger roaming these lands. A dream of home, of family, of belonging. And as strange as it seemed, she saw in him the possibility of something deeper, not just safety for her daughter, but perhaps a bond that neither of them had expected to imagine. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the dry earth, the corn, the approaching day. Clara felt the weight of the decision pressing on her like the first chill of winter. She could turn away, cling to caution and skepticism, or she could take a chance, a leap of faith into the unknown. Her eyes flicked toward the cabin, toward Lila, and she saw the child's small form pressed against the window pane, curious, wide-eyed, unaware of the choice she would soon influence. "Will you come inside?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. I need to know you're serious." "She deserves more than just promises in the wind." The Apache nodded, stepping closer, his shadow long across the yard as he approached the cabin. There was a quiet reverence in the way he moved, as if the ground itself deserved respect, as if he understood that every step carried weight. "I am serious," he said, and there was a quiet gravity in the words that made her heart quicken. "She will have a home. And she will have someone who stands with her, who protects her, who—" He stopped, as if measuring whether to say more. Clara's breath caught. There was a hesitancy, a vulnerability behind the strength, and it struck her with the force of revelation. The Apache, who had roamed the plains alone, who had carried the silence and solitude of his people, was daring to dream something new, something he had never admitted, not even to himself. "Something else?" Clara asked softly, curious despite the caution threading her thoughts. He glanced at her, eyes dark and unreadable, yet with a warmth she could not ignore. "I dream of more than just shelter for her," he said slowly, each word deliberate, as if carving them into the very air between them. "I dream of family. I dream of belonging. Perhaps even being someone worthy of her trust and care." The words hung there, startling, fragile, almost dangerous in their honesty. Clara felt the weight of them, heavier than the autumn sun pressing down on the plains. She did not know if the Apache understood how rare such openness was, how impossible it seemed in a world hardened by loss and fear. But she knew one thing. This man, this stranger who had entered their lives with quiet strength, was different. Her eyes darted to Lila again. The girl's small face pressed to the glass, eyes wide, lips parted in curiosity and wonder. Clara felt the familiar pang of motherly fear, the desperate wish to protect, to shield, to guide. And yet, she also felt the tremor of possibility, a chance for her daughter to know care and safety, and perhaps even joy. "Then we must not waste time," Clara said at last, her voice steadier than she expected. "She is waiting. And winter does not forgive hesitation." The Apache inclined his head. "Then we will not wait," he said, his tone final, resolute. He reached toward the cabin door, hand steady, eyes never leaving hers. "Let us see this through. Whatever it takes." As the door creaked open and Lila stepped hesitantly into the yard, the morning light casting long shadows across the land, Clara felt a mixture of relief and unease. The journey ahead was uncertain. There were dangers she could not foresee, challenges that would test them all. And yet, standing there, the child and the Apache, side by side, she felt something she had not dared feel in years. Hope, and perhaps something more, a glimpse of a future she had never imagined. But as the wind swept through the fields, carrying with it the scent of earth and change, Clara could not shake the lingering thought, the whisper of warning that rode on the breeze. Dreams, even the most honest, could be fragile. And in a land as unforgiving as this, even the strongest intentions could face trials that would test the heart and courage of every soul. The Apache looked down at Lila, a hint of a smile breaking the solemnity of his face. And in that smile, Clara saw the first thread of a bond forming, delicate yet unbreakable. But she also saw the unspoken question lingering in the air, a challenge that neither of them could yet answer. Could a wandering soul, a man forged by the plains and solitude, truly become the family her daughter so desperately needed? The answer had yet to be revealed. And in that uncertain morning, with the wind carrying both promise and danger, Clara felt the first tremors of a story that would change all their lives forever. Clara watched the Apache carefully as he knelt down to meet Lila's eyes. The child trembled slightly, both from the morning chill and from the sudden swirl of strangers and new faces. The Apache extended a hand, not in command, but in invitation, patient and still. Lila hesitated, looking first to her mother, then back to the man who seemed as steady as the ground itself. Finally, with a small nod, she reached out. Clara's heart clenched. That single gesture, simple yet profound, was a bridge between two worlds, the innocence of a child and the quiet strength of a man shaped by the land. The Apache straightened, lifting Lila gently as he stood. His touch was firm but careful, protective without being overbearing. Clara noticed the way he adjusted his hold, ensuring she was safe while still letting her feel independent. The movement carried a kind of practiced ease, the kind of care that came from experience beyond mere survival. There was a story behind those hands, a life lived on the edge, and Clara felt a mixture of awe and curiosity. She wanted to know it, but also feared the truth might be darker than her imagination could hold. "You'll be safe," he said softly, more to himself than to her, though the words reached Lila's ears like a quiet promise. Clara felt the weight of them. Safety was a fragile thing, more so for a child on the margins of a harsh land. The Apache's words had authority, but they also carried an unusual tenderness that suggested he had known loss, had faced hardships, and perhaps had longed for connection he had never claimed before. As they moved toward the wagon, Clara could not stop herself from asking, "Where have you been all this time? You don't belong to any town around here." Her voice carried both caution and the desperate curiosity of someone pressed to trust the unknown. He paused, looking toward the hills that rose against the pale sky. "I've lived where few choose to go," he said. His tone was steady, revealing nothing yet suggesting everything. The plains teach lessons. Not all are gentle, and not all are meant to be forgotten. Sometimes a man learns to survive alone, but dreams still find him in the quiet of night. Clara tried to read him, but the words only deepened the mystery. Who was this man who could carry a child with such care and yet speak in riddles? She wanted answers, but the world had taught her to measure her hope carefully. "You mean you've lived alone all this time?" He nodded slightly, eyes scanning the horizon again. "Alone, yes, but never without stories. The wind, the land, the animals. They speak if you listen. And sometimes, in the silence, a man dreams of more than survival." He glanced down at Lila again, and something shifted in his eyes, a vulnerability, almost shy, that Clara had not expected from someone so imposing. Dreams that scare him, dreams of family, of belonging, even a home of his own. The words hung in the air, strange and fragile. Clara felt her pulse quicken. The notion that this lone man, forged by harsh lands and solitude, carried dreams of partnership, of marriage, seemed impossible. And yet, something in the sincerity of his voice and the careful way he held Lila made her consider the unthinkable. Perhaps the hardest hearts could still be moved. Perhaps even those who had never known love could learn to give it. The wagon creaked as he settled Lila inside. Clara moved to help, adjusting the blankets around her daughter and smoothing the lines of the worn shawl she still clutched. "You'll need supplies," she said cautiously, trying to steady her own voice. "Food, blankets, things for winter. You can't just take her and—" She broke off, realizing the absurdity of the fear that had lodged in her chest. The Apache was no reckless wanderer. She could see it in the way he moved, in the care he extended to her daughter. "I know," he said simply, strapping the supplies and securing the small bundles. "I will not fail her. And I will not fail myself. She deserves more than half-hearted promises." There was a weight in his tone, a determination that seemed to push against the limits of the plane itself. Clara felt a shiver not of fear, but of anticipation. Whatever lay ahead, it was bound to change them all. As the wagon's wheels turned over the rough trail, dust rising behind them, Clara felt the sharp contrast between the known world she left behind and the uncertain path opening before them. Every mile carried questions she could not answer. Where had this Apache come from? What had shaped him to be both so fierce and so gentle? Could she trust him to keep her daughter safe? And most troubling of all, what did it mean that he dared to dream of being more than a protector, of being a husband, a partner, someone who might fill the gaps left by grief and hardship? Her mind drifted back to the months before the stranger had arrived. The endless search for help, the doors that had closed, the raised eyebrows and dismissive nods of those who had no room for a struggling mother and child. The small farm had been generous once, a place of hope, but time and misfortune had hollowed it out. And then came the shadows, the threats of the harsh winter, the meager harvests, the gnawing fear that she might fail Lila in the simplest, most fundamental ways. She had survived, yes, but at what cost? And now, as the wind tugged at the edges of her worn dress and the wagon jostled over stones, she felt an unfamiliar tension. The fragile hope that someone else could step in, someone strong enough to carry what she could not. Lila, sensing the tension, clutched the blankets tighter. Her small fingers sought comfort in the fabric, her eyes darting between her mother and the Apache. Clara noticed the unspoken questions in the child's gaze, questions she could not yet answer. She wanted to reassure her, to promise safety and warmth, but the truth was she did not know how the days ahead would unfold. The plains had a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and Clara understood that this journey was only beginning. The Apache's presence offered both reassurance and mystery. He had not spoken much about his past, and Clara did not press him, though curiosity clawed at her mind. She could sense the layers beneath the surface, the life of someone who had known hardship, someone who had moved through silence and solitude long enough to see people entrust with careful deliberation. Yet beneath that quiet strength, she sensed a yearning, a vulnerability. He had not spoken openly of love or companionship, but the glances he exchanged with Lila suggested a man imagining what life could be like if he allowed himself to care, to dream, to hope. They reached a small rise where the plains opened into a valley lined with oaks. Clara had passed this way many times, but today the landscape felt different, unfamiliar, shifting under the weight of change. The wagon creaked as it moved down the slope, and the Apache guided it carefully, his eyes scanning for any danger. Clara admired the skill, the ease with which he handled both the wagon and the terrain, and she could not help but wonder what life had taught him to be so precise, so patient. There was a story here, she knew, one written in scars, in cautious glances, in moments of silent reflection that the world had not witnessed. At the bottom of the valley, a small stream wound through the fields, glinting in the morning sun. Clara recognized the spot from years past, but now it seemed imbued with possibility, as if the land itself whispered of change and new beginnings. The Apache guided the wagon to the edge of the water and stopped. Lila leaned over slightly, fascinated by the ripples. Clara breathed out slowly, grateful for the pause, yet aware that every calm carried the weight of the unknown. The Apache dismounted and knelt by the water, scooping some into his hands and letting it trickle slowly back. The motion was simple, almost meditative, yet Clara noticed the care in every gesture, the attentiveness that suggested he treated even the smallest act with respect. He looked back at her, eyes steady, and Clara felt a shiver run through her. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of pride and restraint, a quiet promise that he would guard her daughter as if she were his own. And yet, the unspoken question lingered. Could he truly become the man he imagined himself to be? Could he fulfill a role he had never dared to step into before? Lila, sensing the pause, reached out and touched his hand. The Apache's eyes softened, and he offered a small, encouraging smile. Clara felt her heart tighten. In that simple connection, she saw the fragile beginning of trust, the tentative threads that could grow into something strong and enduring. And yet, there was still the shadow of doubt, the echo of the harsh world waiting beyond the hills. "Do you think she will like it?" Lila asked softly, voice barely above the breeze. "She will," the Apache said, without hesitation, though his eyes betrayed the weight of the responsibility he felt. "And so will I." Clara could sense the truth in his words, even if the journey ahead remained uncertain. The plains had a way of testing hearts, and there were many trials they would face before hope could take root fully. But for the first time in months, Clara allowed herself a tentative sense of possibility. The Apache had arrived not as a savior, but as a man willing to step into a role he had never known. And in that willingness lay the promise of something extraordinary. As the wagon rested by the stream and the morning stretched across the valley, Clara knew that the path ahead would demand courage from all of them. Secrets and fears lingered, waiting for the right moment to surface. And she could not ignore the uneasy feeling that, for all his strength and care, the Apache carried shadows from a past that might one day reach across the land and challenge every hope they were beginning to build. Yet for now, there was only this fragile calm, the quiet bond forming between child and man, and the uncertain anticipation of a journey that would test their hearts, their courage, and the very meaning of family. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the hills, Clara sensed the first tremors of a story that would not easily let them go. A story of survival, of dreams, of love and courage, and of the unknown forces that awaited them, patient and unyielding. The sun climbed higher, and the plains held their breath. Clara did too. Lila's small hand rested in the Apache's, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, waiting for the next choice, the next step, the next unfolding of fate. And in that silence, Clara understood that everything was about to change and nothing would ever be the same again. The wind shifted once more, and with it came the faintest hint of movement along the tree line, a shadow in the distance that did not belong. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Whatever lay ahead, it would not wait, and neither could they. The wagon had barely settled by the stream when Clara realized how little she actually knew about the Apache who now held her daughter's trust in his hands. His eyes had a quiet weight, one that hinted at a life full of stories left untold. Clara had sensed it from the very first moment, the kind of presence that could command respect without raising a voice. Yet as she watched him move about the small clearing, adjusting blankets and checking their supplies, she also felt the fragile edges of uncertainty pressing in. What dangers had shaped him? What shadows did he carry that might one day cross their path? Lila, sensing the tension in her mother, clutched her hand tighter. She had always been perceptive beyond her years, aware of the undercurrents adults often tried to mask. "Mother," she whispered, "is he really going to take care of me?" Her voice was small, hesitant, yet layered with trust. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to promise everything, to assure her child that all fears would vanish, but the truth was the world they were stepping into was unforgiving. She met the Apache's gaze instead, silently asking for reassurance. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, and Lila relaxed, at least for a moment, in the quiet certainty of his presence. Clara wanted to follow him, to observe every step, but she knew she had to give him space to act as he must. She walked the perimeter of the clearing, scanning the hills and ridges that bordered their temporary haven. The wind carried the scent of approaching winter, crisp and biting, and with it, the sense of isolation that had become their companion. There were no towns for miles, no neighbors whose doors might open if danger arose. They were alone, dependent on the man who had appeared with the morning light, and Clara realized how starkly that reality pressed upon them all. The Apache returned from the wagon with a small bundle of kindling. He knelt near the stream, stacking the sticks with care, preparing a fire that would bring warmth and comfort. Clara noticed how his hands worked, methodical and deliberate, revealing a skill honed through necessity. There was pride in his movements, but also restraint, as if he measured each action not for show, but for the safety and well-being of those he protected. "He's been alone a long time," Clara murmured to herself, the words barely audible. The observation felt dangerous, exposing her thoughts in the air between them. He glanced up briefly, eyes dark and steady. "Solitude teaches a man many things," he said. "Some lessons are cruel, but others are worth carrying." Clara did not press him. She could feel there were stories he would tell only when he chose, when he was ready to share not just the events of his life, but the meaning behind them. And perhaps, she thought, that day would never come. Yet even in silence, she could sense his careful watch over Lila, the quiet calculations that balanced protection with freedom. Night began to settle over the valley, shadows stretching long across the plains. Clara built a small fire beside the wagon, casting its flickering light over the faces of her child and their protector. Lila's eyes shone with curiosity and wonder, but beneath it lay an awareness of the fragile nature of their circumstances. She had lived with scarcity and fear long enough to know that comfort was temporary and trust was earned through action rather than words. Clara noticed the subtle shift in her daughter's demeanor as she glanced at the Apache, the tentative admiration forming in the child's eyes. Yet even as the fire offered warmth, a tension lingered in the cool night air. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it a sense of movement beyond the hills. Clara felt it in her bones, the sense that the world they had entered was not empty, and that someone or something watched from the distance. She glanced at the Apache, half expecting him to notice what she felt, and saw that his gaze had already swept the horizon, sharp and alert. The shadows seemed to bend around him, as if he could anticipate danger before it arrived. "Mother," Layla whispered again, tugging at her sleeve, "do you think anyone else is out there?" The question hung in the air, simple, yet loaded with fear and possibility. Clara hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, she did not know. The plains had a history of travelers, of wanderers, of those who sought what they could not find elsewhere. But the unknown carried both promise and peril, and she was not yet ready to face the full scope of it. The Apache knelt beside Lila, setting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "There are many things beyond these hills," he said quietly, voice steady and calm. "Some good, some dangerous. But for now, we focus on what we can see, what we can control. You are safe tonight." His words were measured, deliberate, yet beneath the surface ran a thread of conviction that Clara could not ignore. The man had faced uncertainty before, and he had chosen to step forward to claim responsibility in a way that few could. That choice carried weight, and Clara felt both hope and fear in equal measure. The night deepened, the fire crackling against the rising wind. Clara watched the Apache as he moved, setting up a small area for Lila to sleep, arranging blankets with care and making sure the wagon was secure. Every action was purposeful, revealing layers of thought and experience. Yet she could sense there were memories he carried, events, losses, perhaps betrayals, that shaped the way he moved through the world. She wanted to ask, but the right words eluded her. Some truths, she knew, came only when one was ready to share them. Hours passed and the fire dimmed to glowing embers. Lila slept soundly, cocooned in the warmth of the blankets, her small hand still resting lightly on the Apache's arm. Clara stayed awake, listening to the wind, scanning the dark shapes of the trees and the hills, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing on her. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle in the night a potential threat. And yet, in the steady presence of the Apache, there was a quiet assurance, a sense that whatever came, they would face it together. Clara's thoughts wandered to the coming days, to the preparations needed for winter and the unknown challenges that lay beyond the valley. The Apache had offered protection, but she knew that survival would demand more than skill with tools and knowledge of the land. They would need alliances, careful observation, and perhaps even trust in others who walked the plains. And there, at the edge of her mind, lay the unspoken tension. The man they relied upon was still a stranger, his past unknown, his dreams still untested by the harsh realities of the world. Morning arrived with the same crisp air, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant fires. Clara rose early, adjusting the blankets and making sure Lila was warm. The Apache was already awake, standing by the stream, scanning the horizon. His vigilance was silent and precise, and Clara realized that his alertness extended beyond mere survival. It was instinct, honed by years of solitude and careful observation. She admired him for it, yet could not shake the sense that the unknown was closing in, threading its way through every hill and hollow. They broke camp slowly, the wagon wheels rolling over uneven ground as the child looked on with curiosity and wonder. Clara tried to distract her, pointing out birds and the shapes of distant hills, but she could see the girl's mind was already alert to the nuances of the situation. The Apache walked beside the wagon, eyes sharp, his presence both comforting and commanding. Clara wondered how he had come to be this way, how he had learned to balance solitude with the fierce need to protect, and whether he had ever imagined himself in this role before. By midday, the landscape shifted, revealing a thin trail winding through low hills. Clara sensed the tension rising, the way the wind seemed to carry distant voices and the faintest hint of movement. She glanced at the Apache, who did not speak but adjusted his pace, moving with quiet precision as if anticipating unseen dangers. Lila clutched her mother's hand, silent, wide-eyed, absorbing every nuance of the journey. Clara felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, realizing that the safety of her daughter now relied on a delicate balance of trust, vigilance, and the unknown skills of a man who had lived on the edge of the world. As afternoon faded toward evening, the trail opened into a small clearing, partially hidden by clusters of oak and pine. Clara felt her pulse quicken. The land seemed familiar, yet unfamiliar, a place that could offer shelter but also danger. The Apache paused, scanning the horizon, and Clara sensed his thoughts were elsewhere, focused on distant threats and possibilities she could not yet see. He motioned for them to halt, and the wagon settled as he moved ahead, stepping lightly, alert to every sound and shadow. Lila whispered, "Mother, are we going to be safe here?" Clara hesitated, then nodded slowly. "For now," she said, "but we have to be careful. There's much we do not know." The Apache returned to them, signaling the child to step down. He guided them gently, placing Lila's hand in his own, and Clara followed, her heart heavy with the knowledge that each step forward carried risks they could not fully measure. As they settled into the clearing, Clara noticed subtle signs that someone had passed through before them. The ground showed faint tracks, remnants of fires long extinguished, and the wind carried echoes of movement through the trees. The Apache's expression hardened slightly, the first crack in the calm she had seen from him. Clara felt the tension sharpen. Whoever had come this way before might not have been friendly, and if danger lingered nearby, they would need every ounce of skill and courage to protect themselves. Evening fell, and the shadows lengthened. Clara built a small fire again, while the Apache patrolled the perimeter, silent and watchful. Lila sat close to her, her small frame tense, and Clara realized the child was already sensing the uncertainty in the air. She reached out, brushing hair from Lila's face, offering comfort even as her own mind wrestled with the unknown. The Apache returned to them, eyes dark and vigilant, and Clara noticed a subtle shift, a readiness, a preparedness for challenges she could not yet anticipate. The night deepened, and Clara felt the pull of unease. There were stories in the wind, stories of strangers and wanderers, of harsh winters and lost travelers, and she could not shake the sense that their journey was only beginning. The Apache had offered protection, but the plains had a way of testing resolve, of revealing truths in harsh, unforgiving ways. And Clara realized that survival would demand more than vigilance. It would demand courage, trust, and perhaps sacrifices she could not yet imagine. As the fire flickered and the night stretched on, the first distant sounds of movement reached their ears, a rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch, a whisper carried by the wind. Clara's pulse quickened. The Apache rose, every muscle taut, eyes scanning the darkness. Lila clutched her mother's hand, silent, sensing the tension. Clara could see the determination in the Apache's stance, the readiness to face whatever came. Yet beneath it, she sensed the unspoken question lingering in the night. What challenges lay ahead, and could they endure them together? The shadows held their breath, and the plains waited, patient and indifferent, while Clara, Lila, and the Apache faced the uncertainty of a world that demanded vigilance and courage in equal measure. And somewhere beyond the hills, the first signs of a story yet to unfold stirred, ready to test their trust, their strength, and the fragile bonds forming between them. The night was alive with tension, every shadow stretching long across the valley, twisting and bending as if they had a life of their own. Clara could feel it in her bones, the pressing weight of uncertainty that wrapped around them like the cold. She kept a hand on Lila's shoulder, small but firm, while the Apache moved with quiet precision along the perimeter, eyes scanning the darkness as though he could see the unseen. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying distant sounds that Clara could not identify, a branch snapping here, a rustle there. Every small noise felt amplified, a warning she could not afford to ignore. Lila shivered, nestling closer to her mother. "Are they coming?" she whispered, her voice trembling in the night. Clara hesitated, not wanting to frighten her, but the truth could not be hidden. "I don't know, honey," she said softly. "But we have someone with us who knows how to handle danger." She nodded toward the Apache, who crouched low beside the fire, his gaze sharp, muscles coiled like springs ready to react. Lila's eyes met his, and he gave the faintest of reassuring nods, but it carried weight. Even in the silence, Clara sensed the unspoken promise. No harm would reach them while he was near. Hours passed in tense quiet. The fire crackled weakly, struggling against the chill, and Clara noticed how alert the Apache remained. He moved silently between the wagon and the tree line, checking the surroundings with meticulous care. There was a rhythm to his vigilance, a pattern that suggested experience, and Clara felt both relief and unease. Experience was valuable, but it also meant he had seen danger before, perhaps worse than anything they could imagine. And if that danger had survived him once, she feared what might happen tonight. Lila finally drifted into uneasy sleep, her small body curled tightly against her mother. Clara stayed awake, listening, feeling the tension building with every passing hour. She thought about the days that had brought them here, the struggle to find safety, the endless uncertainty, and the fleeting moments of hope when the Apache had appeared like a shadow walking out of the morning sun. She had trusted him instinctively, even before she fully understood him. And now, faced with the night, she realized how fragile that trust could be, how quickly it could be tested. Suddenly, a sound pierced the stillness, a low, almost imperceptible snapping of a branch beyond the tree line. Clara froze, heart pounding, and the Apache's body stiffened. His hand moved to the hilt of his knife, eyes narrowing into the dark. He crouched low, muscles tense, every sense focused. Clara felt her pulse quicken, a cold sweat breaking across her skin. The plains had taught her to recognize danger, but even she could not anticipate what lurked in the night beyond the firelight. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate and careful. Someone or something was moving through the trees, aware of their presence. Clara held her breath, feeling the gravity of the moment press against her chest. She could see the Apache's eyes flick toward her, reading her fear, and then toward the wagon, assessing the safest positions for them to defend themselves. He had become more than a protector, he had become their anchor in a world that seemed determined to test them. "Stay low," he whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. Clara pressed herself against the ground, pulling Lila close. The fire offered little light, but its warmth reminded her of the fragile bubble of safety they clung to. Every shadow seemed alive, and Clara could feel her mind spinning through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She trusted the Apache, but she also knew that even the strongest could be challenged when the stakes were high. A rustle closer to the clearing made her heart leap. Clara could see shapes moving just beyond the light, too fast and precise to be ordinary animals. She clenched her hands, feeling Lila's small fingers tightening around hers. The Apache stood slowly, every movement deliberate, positioning himself between the approaching threat and the wagon. Clara's breath caught. He was calm, almost unnervingly so, but she could feel the tension coiling in the air like a storm ready to break. "Who's there?" his voice called, steady and commanding. It carried across the clearing, confident and unyielding, yet careful not to provoke unnecessarily. The shadows remained still for a heartbeat, then shifted. A figure stepped forward, hesitant, perhaps testing the barrier of courage the Apache had erected. Clara's pulse quickened, fear and anticipation mixing in a tight knot in her stomach. The night had become a trap, each movement, each sound amplified by the uncertainty that surrounded them. The figure moved closer, revealing itself in the flickering light of the fire. It was a man, weary and ragged, his eyes darting nervously between Clara, Lila, and the Apache. He raised his hands slightly, a gesture of peace, yet his posture betrayed caution. "I mean no harm," he said, voice low and cautious. I seek shelter if it can be offered." Clara's breath caught. Another traveler, another presence in the night, how could they know whom to trust? Yet the Apache remained still, eyes assessing, every instinct alert. He stepped forward slightly, closing the distance with measured authority. "Shelter comes with rules," the Apache said, voice firm. "And trust is earned, not given freely." The man nodded quickly, stepping back in acknowledgement. Clara felt the tension in the clearing tighten, aware that every word, every gesture, could shift the fragile balance between safety and danger. Lila stirred slightly, sensing the uncertainty in the air, and Clara pressed a hand to her shoulder, grounding her with quiet reassurance. The stranger shifted, his eyes flicking toward the wagon and the sleeping child. "I only need a place for the night," he said. "I will not trouble you further." The Apache's gaze lingered, sharp and unyielding, and Clara felt the quiet power in his assessment. He had faced unknown threats before, and his judgment was precise, honed through experience. Finally, he inclined his head slightly, granting permission with a silent warning in his posture. The man moved closer cautiously, careful not to disturb the fire or the sleeping child. Clara could feel the air thick with anticipation, every second stretched taut. She watched the Apache, noting how he remained poised, his body language both protective and commanding. The tension did not ease, it shifted, like the wind before a storm, carrying with it the promise of something approaching, unseen and dangerous. As the night deepened, the conversation between the Apache and the stranger remained sparse, deliberate. Clara listened, catching fragments, realizing that trust was being weighed, measured, and tested in ways words could not fully express. Layla slept on, unaware of the careful dance of vigilance unfolding around her, her safety hanging in the balance of silent judgment and instinct. Clara's heart ached with both hope and fear. They had found an ally in this stranger, perhaps, yet every new presence carried uncertainty. Hours passed with the wind shifting across the clearing, carrying distant sounds that neither Clara nor the Apache could ignore. A low howl echoed from the hills, distant but haunting, a reminder of the wild that surrounded them. Clara shivered, drawing the blankets closer, feeling the isolation of their position. Every sense was heightened, every shadow a potential threat, and she realized how much they had to rely on the Apache, not just for protection, but for the wisdom to navigate the unknown. The stranger finally settled near the edge of the clearing, careful not to cross boundaries. Clara observed the dynamics unfolding, noting the subtle balance of power, trust, and caution. She understood that the night was a test not only of survival but of character, of judgment, of the ability to discern friend from foe when every instinct screamed uncertainty. The Apache remained vigilant, his presence a shield, his mind constantly evaluating, and Clara felt the weight of gratitude mixed with anxiety. Morning approached slowly, the first hints of light brushing the horizon, but the tension did not dissipate. The night had left traces, a sense that eyes had watched them, that danger still lingered beyond the hills, waiting for the right moment. Clara knew that the journey ahead would demand every ounce of courage, every spark of hope, and every measure of trust they could muster. The plains had tested them before, and they would do so again. As the sun rose fully, casting pale light over the clearing, Clara took a deep breath. She glanced at the Apache, who stood near Lila, vigilant but calm, the silent promise of protection etched into every line of his stance. She realized that the coming hours would push them to the limits, their fears, their hopes, their bonds, all would be tested. The unknown had not yet revealed its full challenge, and Clara understood that the true trial was only beginning. The distant hills held secrets, the wind carried whispers, and the shadows of the night lingered even in the daylight. Clara's mind raced with possibilities, each more daunting than the last. The Apache's quiet confidence was their anchor, yet she knew that the final test, the one that would define their future, had not yet arrived. It would come, she sensed it, sudden and unrelenting, demanding courage, judgment, and heart. She knelt beside Lila, brushing hair from her face, feeling the warmth of her child against the chill of the morning. "We are ready," she whispered, not entirely certain she believed it herself. The Apache's gaze met hers, unspoken understanding passing between them. They had faced the night, survived uncertainty, and yet the greatest challenge remained ahead, one that would test their trust, their courage, and the fragile threads of hope that now bound them together. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the distant murmur of movement, a signal that the unknown was drawing closer. Clara rose slowly, drawing the blankets tighter around Lila, and felt the first true tremor of anticipation. The day would demand decisions, courage, and action, and every second would stretch taut with suspense. She glanced at the Apache, standing tall and ready, and knew that whatever came, they would face it together, hearts aligned, yet still aware of the lurking uncertainty that threatened to change everything. The plains seemed to hold their breath as the trio prepared to move, the tension rising with each passing moment. Shadows shifted in the distance, distant shapes moving through the hills, and Clara felt the sharp edge of anticipation cut through her chest. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every heartbeat carried the promise of courage, of hope, of a future yet unwritten. The climax of their trial had not yet arrived, but Clara sensed it close, imminent, a force gathering on the horizon. Every choice, every action, every word would shape what came next. And as the sun climbed higher, the air thick with anticipation, she realized that the story was about to demand everything they had: fear, hope, courage, and trust in ways they had only glimpsed in the shadows of night. The Apache adjusted his stance, ready, watchful, the silent promise of protection clear in every movement. Lila stirred in her mother's arms, sensing the tension and the importance of what was about to unfold. Clara swallowed, feeling the pulse of the unknown beating against her chest. The plains had not yet delivered their trial, but the signs were unmistakable. The moment was near, the forces gathering, the final test of courage and hope approaching with relentless certainty. The wind whispered, the shadows shifted, and the story held its breath, poised on the edge of what could be triumph or danger, as Clara, Lila, and the Apache stood together, ready for the unfolding challenge that would demand the full measure of heart, trust, and courage. The tension that had gripped the valley since nightfall finally began to ease as the first true light of morning spilled across the plains. The shadows of the night, which had seemed to carry unseen threats, now looked small and harmless in the sun's glow. Clara watched the Apache as he moved calmly among the wagon and the clearing, checking the surroundings once more with precise, practiced steps. The distant hills were empty, the forest quiet, and for the first time in what felt like days, Clara allowed herself a slow exhale. They had survived the night. Lila stirred in her mother's arms, blinking sleep from her eyes, and smiled faintly when she saw the Apache kneeling beside the wagon. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and wonder. The Apache looked up, returning her smile with the smallest tilt of his head, his eyes warm but vigilant. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for the man who had become their protector, their guide and the quiet anchor in a world that had offered so little certainty. The stranger from the night before, who had lingered on the edge of the clearing, now approached with cautious steps. His presence was no longer threatening. Instead, it seemed almost relieved, as though the danger he had feared had vanished along with the dark. The Apache stood, motioning for him to sit near the fire. Clara noticed the subtle nod exchanged between the two men, a mutual understanding born of a shared trial. It was not a friendship yet, but it was the foundation of trust, the unspoken agreement that they had each played a part in protecting Lila through the night. Clara wrapped a blanket around Lila and helped her climb down from the wagon. The child's small feet touched the soft earth, and she ran to the Apache, taking his hand as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Clara's heart swelled at the sight. The bond between the child and the man who had stepped into a role none had expected now fully visible. Lila looked up at her mother and then back at the Apache, and Clara understood that, in this simple act, a new chapter of trust and connection had begun. The Apache spoke to Lila in a quiet, measured tone, giving her instructions to gather firewood and help with the morning preparations. She obeyed eagerly, her curiosity and admiration apparent in every movement. Clara watched as he guided her with patience and firmness, teaching without scolding, leading without dominating. It was a delicate balance, one that spoke of years of living in solitude and the wisdom gained from understanding both the strength and fragility of life. Clara turned to the stranger, now seated by the fire. "Thank you for waiting," she said softly. "I know it wasn't easy to trust us or him." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck, eyes thoughtful. "I've seen enough to know when people mean what they say. And he's not just a man who survives. He protects. He carries more than his own weight." Clara felt a weight lift from her chest at his words. The Apache's reputation, his quiet strength, and the trust he inspired had earned acknowledgment even from another wary traveler. The morning passed with a slow rhythm, the kind that carried both relief and reflection. They cooked a small meal over the fire, shared sparse food, and laughed quietly at small, simple moments. Lila discovered a patch of wildflowers near the stream and insisted on picking a few for the wagon, placing them carefully in a small tin cup. The Apache watched her with a smile that was easy to miss, but impossible to misinterpret, a mixture of pride and affection. Clara saw it too, felt it, and realized that something deeper had formed between them, a bond stronger than mere circumstance. As the sun rose higher, Clara felt brave enough to speak. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady but thoughtful. "Winter is coming, and the clearing won't keep us for long." The Apache nodded, already considering the trails ahead, the safest paths, and the hidden areas that would provide shelter without attracting attention. His eyes scanned the horizon with careful precision, yet there was a calm certainty in his movements now, one that Clara had not seen the night before. The tension that had haunted the night was replaced with focused determination. Lila ran ahead, skipping lightly across the clearing, and the Apache followed, his hand extended to guide her as she laughed at her own small daring. Clara followed more slowly, her heart lifted by the sight of her daughter finding joy even in the aftermath of fear. She realized that they had survived more than a single night. They had survived the weight of doubt, the pressure of uncertainty, and the first test of trust. And in that survival, they had found strength in each other. The stranger helped gather supplies for the journey ahead, offering quiet assistance that was both respectful and practical. He had proven himself by surviving the night without incident, but now his role had shifted to that of an observer and ally. Clara noticed how the Apache welcomed the help without relinquishing control, the balance between leadership and cooperation clear and seamless. It was an unspoken lesson in trust, and Clara understood that their journey forward would depend on that same careful equilibrium. As they prepared to leave the clearing, the Apache spoke quietly to Clara. "The land is open, but not empty," he said, eyes sharp. "We move with caution, but with confidence." "You've done well to come this far," Clara nodded, feeling both pride and gratitude. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience, and she understood that her own strength had been tested and proven in the shadow of the night's threats. They set off together, the wagon rolling over the rough trails, Lila between them, laughing and curious at every new sight. Clara watched the plains stretch endlessly ahead, aware of the unknown that still lay before them, but also certain that whatever came, they would face it together. The Apache walked beside her, quiet but attentive, and Clara sensed that he, too, had been changed by the events of the past night. The bond between protector and family, once tentative, was now solidified, tempered by shared experience and mutual respect. The journey carried them over hills and through patches of forest, each step a reminder of the fragility and resilience of life. Clara thought of the nights they had endured, the moments of fear and uncertainty, and realized that those trials had shaped them into a family, not by blood, but by choice. Lila skipped ahead, her laughter a constant reminder that joy could exist even in the harshest circumstances. The Apache's presence ensured safety, but it also allowed space for love and connection to grow, small and steady, like the first shoots of spring after a long winter. By midday they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley filled with wild grasses and distant streams. The Apache paused, scanning the horizon for danger, then turned to Clara and Lila. "This is a place to rest," he said, voice calm but firm. "We are not yet safe for long, but here we can prepare for the days ahead." Lila ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist in a spontaneous hug, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This simple act, full of trust and affection, marked a turning point in their journey. The day passed with shared work and quiet moments of reflection. They built a temporary shelter from branches and cloth, gathered firewood, and cooked a modest meal. Clara watched the Apache guide Lila with patience, teaching small lessons about care and responsibility, while the stranger helped where he could, fitting seamlessly into their little unit. The rhythm of the day was grounding, replacing the tension of the night with the assurance of connection and purpose. As evening fell, Clara finally allowed herself to speak what she had held back. I never thought we would find someone like you," she said, voice quiet but steady. "Someone who could step into our lives and care so completely." The Apache looked at her, eyes softened by the warmth of the fire and the trust that had grown between them. "I never thought I would either," he admitted. "But sometimes life brings opportunities we do not expect, and we must choose to take them. You and your daughter have given me that choice." Clara felt the weight of those words, the depth of meaning behind them. She realized that this journey, fraught with danger and uncertainty, had also brought them hope, connection, and the possibility of family. Lila leaned against the Apache, her small head resting on his shoulder, and for the first time in many months, Clara felt a sense of peace. They had endured the trials, faced fear, and emerged not only alive but bonded in ways stronger than circumstance alone could forge. Night fell again, but this time without the oppressive tension of before. The fire burned steadily, the stars scattered across the clear sky, and Clara felt the calm of the plains settle around them. Lila slept soundly between them, and the Apache sat near, vigilant but relaxed, allowing himself to share in the small joys of the evening. The stranger, too, had settled nearby, a quiet acknowledgment of their shared journey and the trust they had built. Clara realized that the story of the past nights, the trials and fears, had led them to this point, not just survival, but understanding, connection, and hope. The Apache's presence had brought safety, yes, but also the possibility of something more. A family forged not by chance, but by courage, trust, and choice. She understood that the future remained unknown, but for the first time she felt ready to face it with confidence, knowing that together they could endure whatever came. As the fire dimmed and the night wrapped them in its quiet embrace, Clara looked at the Apache and smiled. "We're ready for what comes next," she said softly. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Lila stirred in her sleep, murmuring something she could not quite form, and Clara felt a warm certainty that, no matter the challenges ahead, this night marked a turning point. The plains whispered around them, carrying the memory of fear and the promise of hope. Clara felt it deeply, the bond they had formed, the strength they had found in each other, and the courage that had carried them through darkness. The journey was not yet complete, but the path forward was clear. They would move together, hearts aligned, guided by trust, care, and the quiet strength of the man who had once walked alone. And as the stars shone above the valley, the warmth of the fire between them, and the gentle breath of a child sleeping in safety, Clara allowed herself a rare moment of peace. They had faced the unknown, survived the trials, and discovered that hope, love, and courage could emerge even in the harshest landscapes. The future awaited, but for now they were together, whole, and safe, and that was more than enough to carry them into the days to come.